I came home. Oh, is this thing on? Is this thing on? I can't. I took a late flight. I flew out of Atlanta at 8:45 or so, but I was home before midnight and had a whole day of phone calls this morning. And then my last one, I took a sunshine meeting. I this
Yeah.
morning. So somebody asked me. They're like, "Oh, are you tired from your flight?" I was like, "No, I'm not tired from my flight. Yesterday I got up at 7:30, 7:45. I had a 2.5 hour meeting, and then the rest of the day to get on an airplane. No, I'm not tired. This morning I was up at 6:30, and by 7:10 I was being screamed at by a toddler who didn't want to poop on the toilet. Like, no, I'm tired from that, yeah, but not from the trip.
Yeah. So was that not a direct flight?
No, it was. There were only I booked super late, and there were only three flights, and one of them was like 8 o'clock until or 8:45 to 9:15 or 9:30 or something like that. It
Gotcha.
was it was short, really easy.
Dulles or National, Reagan?
I try to fly from National. It's slightly more convenient to park. The parking is closer to the airport and cheaper. So if I'm driving and parking, I like that airport. If I'm going with a bunch of people, then Dulles is easier because there's a lot more space to navigate while you're there.
Hmm.
But
Oh,
I'm dead center between the two of them. They're both equidistant from my home, which was intentional.
yeah. So how often are you a weekly traveler or are you a monthly
I've
traveler?
never been a weekly traveler, thank the Lord. I think I peaked at you know 4 trips a month, but it was still typically in every other week I'd have a trip or two stops in one trip kind of thing, and that was sort of the most I ever hit. I ran out of departmental travel budget typically before I ran out of places that could be useful to go.
Mm.
And I was not a valuable enough asset to send on the extra trips, which I never pushed on that because I was perfectly happy to be traveling twice a month and that be it.
Yeah. I've had stretches where it's been a bit of a grind, but I haven't, obviously COVID derailed everybody, or I won't say derailed, but changed everybody's travel, um, frequency, I'd say. And I haven't gotten back to any sense of like even re- remotely approaching the frequency that I had before COVID, which I'm fine. I'm fine with that too.
I was really surprised in 2020, like by the end of 2020, I had been working with not a remote. They weren't remote coworkers, but it was a remote team. All the projects I did were with people that were distributed certainly across the United States and to some extent in Europe and Asia as well. And we, it was all volunteers from companies, but they were all volunteered from their company. So they were doing this out of choice. And typically the workflow was everything was online. And when I say online, like I started it early enough that the typical meetings in my week to week schedule would be a conference call that you punch in your code to. And then everybody says, okay, did you see my email with the Word document or the PDF in it? Right. Like this was the way I started. And that segued very cleanly into uh, GoToMeeting and WebEx, which like nobody had heard of Zoom at this time, and certainly not like Meet or there was no Teams for web calls. So the conference call was I would have like 5 6 of those most weeks, and then we would meet once a quarter. And then when COVID hit, it was like, okay, I'm assuming now that like all the executives will stop traveling as much because everybody is, and they'll fall back on their normal web meeting routine. And what I found pretty like by December 2020, January 2021, it occurred to me that a lot of the people that I was expecting to have had a similar, we'll meet by phone if needed and then we'll fly. I had that backwards. They were like, we're going to meet in person and we'll only meet in phone if we have to. So it was like panic mode for these people who would fly around the world at the drop of a hat to go have a one day meeting. And I'm like, that was my whole year's travel budget. Like I was gonna, that was two people for all of our meetings for the year, for you to have a 2 hour discussion. And then I realized that I had been given the gift of efficiency by having the gift of no money.
Sorry, no budget. You know, interesting. I think one of the most interesting aspects of COVID for me, from a work standpoint, was how quickly massive organizations went to Teams or to Zoom as a mode of doing business. It was that didn't exist
Near instantaneous.
instant, like at the flip of a switch. And I'm also surprised, the scale, the number of companies who did that. There weren't more cybersecurity incidents than there were, or at all. I mean,
So
it was really, all involved should be applauded.
what? So, and it tells you how much technology is a factor versus how much culture is a factor.
Hmm.
So the technology to hold meetings via web conference or via, you know, you know, via phone call or video call, that stuff existed. Like there was absolutely the infrastructure for that. So, for example, when I would be on the phone with a customer facing sales or business development function in the Bay Area in 2018 or 2019, those people were like, let's do a video call. I'm going to have my camera on, blah, 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 blah. If I had a if I had a technical engineering discussion with software developers and mechanical engineers in Oklahoma City, we were on a conference call line sharing a PDF back and forth. So,
Payphone.
yeah, right. So the technology, like if you'd been exposed to the people, like basically like startup phone booth culture, like offices that have a phone booth for video calls, that stuff already existed. And so picking up on that by everybody else had nothing to do with the tech. It had
Mm.
everything to do with like what's the culture of when do you fly to a meeting, when do you host a video meeting, when do you have a phone call, how many people are appropriate to be on a phone call. To me, it felt like 2 full years of trying to make sure that we could perfectly translate the dysfunction of an in-person meeting to the internet, which was corporate America flawlessly executed that pivot, and we got the worst meetings ever that already were horrible in person, and then we added one more layer of horrible on top of that.
I can't like, there the what, sixth, seventh ring of hell, corporate meetings on Zoom. It's bad. It's 3 minutes of, can you hear me? We can't see you. We can hear you. We can't see you. And then it's, I don't know. I think the worst aspect, or one of the most challenging aspects of COVID from a Zoom meeting standpoint, or from a productivity standpoint, is I think folks are conscientious of being productive, and I think productivity is measured in that environment, still a little bit residually, by the number of calls that you're on, and but like, you have to appear busy, or whatever, you have to talk a lot on the call. So it's, meetings should be a lot shorter than they are. And
Thinking in terms of artifacts and deliverables from meetings, phone calls, discussions, all interactions of the day. So what is the thing that you did? And if the deliverable is you needed to make a decision, then okay, fine. The decision is the deliverable. But how is that decision uh, immortalized
right.
and reflected throughout an organization? How is it reflected with the other people who care? How do you make sure that you don't rehold the same meeting? And so having, you know, I would always, this was like, I completely changed my way of thinking at some point in my career. So I went from meetings were about attending, taking notes, not reading the notes, coming back to the next meeting. The only thing the notes were for was, did I commit to a date on a thing? And have I checked that off as a thing I committed to or not? And there was always room to say, oh, I didn't have that in my notes. And the other person to say, oh, I did have that in my notes. And me to say, sorry, I didn't have it in my notes. What's the new version of this back and forth? And so the fact that that was the culture of how my teammates and I worked was something that I didn't think very much about, but was in fact clearly a culture, right? So it was like very explicitly the culture of how we did business. I changed, positions, but inside the same company. Now the culture changed. Now the culture is, the point of a meeting is to do doc review. Like almost always it is to do doc review, which means that the meeting is never the point. It's, did the document get further edited, right? And if there are no changes to the document after this call, this was not a productive call.
Yeah.
If it was, we know we have a thorny issue and we really want to progress a document, but we can't because the issue is thorny. I was the junior guy in the room, so I wasn't going to be the judge of whether it was effective or not. So if I had a bunch of senior people that all said, well, this was a great conversation, I think we made some progress in our thinking, you know that was okay once a week. But if that was every single meeting, was, we've made some progress in our thinking, there was always this powwow at the end of like, did we get anywhere, right? And a lot of times it was cynical. It was, well, that was a long time spent on nothing. But the self-awareness that it was a long time spent on nothing was the tacit collective agreement that the point of this was to get a place. And the only way that the place matters is that somebody else can follow along, that this is the place we got to, rather than make it about like every interaction is, Terry told me what to do, and next time I will tell Terry that I did the thing Terry asked me to do. I mean, if Terry asked me to do a thing, he shouldn't need to ask me whether I did it or not anymore. I should tell him, of the 10 things you told me, 2 of them had problems and are not done as expected, right? So you can then use the face-to-face time for exception handling as opposed to simple back and forth communication and information sharing.
I've gotten to the place where, and this is not a new development, but when I schedule meetings, there are two things. There's an objective, like in the subject of the meeting.
Yeah.
There's an objective of the meeting, and then there's an agenda in the body of the invite.
How many minutes does it take you to put together objective and agenda and a meeting invite?
It's part of the scheduling of the meeting. I'm not scheduling things that don't have objectives and agendas. Now we have brainstorming sessions, or we have stand-ups
Yeah.
where I'm just asking questions, and it's more a function. It's like a social, not a social function, but it's a, how's everybody doing? What do you need? It's a feedback session.
Yeah.
But if I'm scheduling a meeting where new or changes of existing work or new work or reviews are happening, or I'm doing a readout, or somebody's reading out to me, there are clear objectives and agenda items for that meeting.
Do you want,
And go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
No,
I was
after
going to
you.
say that's not a common occurrence either.
I did. So once I had been to a couple of different cultures of how information is shared, meetings are run, progress is made. So once I had a couple of examples of how that was done differently at different places, that brought the cultural aspect of each of those things. And like, I don't know what else to call it other than the conventions that everybody adheres to without thinking about it. That's the piece of it that's the culture. Are you ready for a flawless segue, by the way?
I've got a segue too. So you start with yours and then I'm going.
No, 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 no. I want to hear yours. I want to hear your segue.
I just discovered earlier this week there is a country music artist, parenthetically, country music artist, new, named Jelly Roll.
How is that a segue? I give that an A for effort.
So it doesn't, you don't, you have no thoughts on the substance of my
No, no,
poorly.
I do have thoughts on the subject of the substance of that, and I am so I know nothing about Jelly Roll. Is Jelly Roll popular or appear to be popular?
I mean, he's
Hold on. You answer that while I ask ChatGPT. No, I'm going to ask Bard because it's faster for me.
Jelly Roll is on things. So if you're on things, people believe that enough eyeballs want to see those things. So I would assume he's popular. He is, as you can imagine, not a skinny man, um, and does not look. I don't understand. Obviously, all of that is programming. So there's a demographic that needs Jelly Roll in country music. So they're the suits are giving that demographic their Jelly Roll. I can imagine what that demographic is, but don't necessarily think we should discuss that. But I was just I was interested. There's a country music singer named Jelly Roll.
Do you want to hear what Bard says about this? Bard is like the Google version of
I know.
ChatGPT. I'm saying this
Yeah.
for our
Oh, gotcha.
for those who are not already aware of what is Bard. ChatGPT is searching Google but with AI, and it's made by OpenAI. Are they owned by somebody, or are
Well,
they
they
their
have
own?
Microsoft. Essentially, Microsoft's a
Yeah.
huge
Okay.
investor.
Okay. And so Bard is the Google equivalent of this, where you type in a prompt and say, "Tell me something." I, I always I think that like everybody knows what this is, but there are lots of people who don't know what Ask ChatGPT or Ask Bard means. So I'm gonna continue to preface things that are self evident to me with a simple explanation. So anyway, Bard says that Jelly Roll has quickly become one of the most popular artists in both rock and country music.
Oh, so he's a rock artist. He's a crossover. I didn't know that.
What
Is is he the new Kid Rock?
is Kid Rock considered crossover?
Um, didn't he do a country song that was real popular? I'm pretty sure he did.
I don't I don't know anything about Kid Rock's catalog. I got Ball with the Ball
Oh
uh
God.
from that was his breakout hit, right? My name is
No, you
Kid
gotta do it on
Rock.
pitch. You gotta do it on pitch. You gotta get the Sam Kinison squeal in.
I don't think I can hit that note.
That's pretty high. I don't think
He's
he
a
hit it.
he's
I
a
think the
mezzo
computer
soprano.
hit it. No,
That lyric was absolutely positively manipulated in
oh,
post production to give
oh,
it that extra Kid Rock punch.
yeah, yeah.
And he also had another song that was it sampled Sweet Home Alabama very heavily. It was a borderline Sweet Home Alabama cover. It was such a significant sample, but then he added rap to it. But that wasn't a country hit. What is Kid Rock? What else is Kid Rock known for besides
Is he
the
the is
guys with
Kid
the 40s and the chicks with beepers?
is Kid Rock the oldest rap artist?
No. Also, I'm not worried about who the oldest rap artist is. I'm old with Cowboy. I forgot Cowboy. Cause I'm a cowboy, baby.
What was
Uh,
his? He had a tearjerker too. Like they were still following like the '80s power ballad, the '80s hair band model with him. He had his rocker breakouts, and then they threw in the lighter. There's a power ballad in there somewhere.
it's okay. Bard's helping me out. Kid Rock ballad. Only God knows why. Oh
Oh,
yeah, that's a pretty good song.
get out of here!
It had Autotune in the middle of it, right? Like Cher style and T-Pain style. It
I
did.
can't. I can't
It did. It
remember.
totally did.
I know I'm familiar with the song, but I can't remember the hook or anything.
Do you think we could make an entire podcast or YouTube channel dedicated exclusively to discussing Autotune?
I'm
That would be
sure.
the whole topic. We would do a daily hour on the Autotune and just call it Autotune hour.
We'd have to have lots of producers lined up to help us
I
sift
feel like it's
through.
I feel like at some point the measure of whether you can make the channel or the podcast work is more a measure of a person's ability to talk endlessly than it is the subject matter.
Unfortunately, I think you're right. I
I
will say
how
this: Autotune, you'd be hard pressed to find a record made that's commercially viable. You'd be hard pressed to find a record made, I'd say the past 7, 8 years, 10 years, maybe, that hasn't been auto-tuned.
well, do you only see here we are. Now we're diving straight into what would be the whole podcast. Autotune is a specific trademarked and copywritten plugin
Mm.
owned by one company. It's a very specific thing. It's
Is it
like
soft? What's the name of it? Oh, it's they had the entire recording soft. They were first and had it's like something works.
SolidWorks.
SolidWorks.
No, it's
Yeah,
not SolidWorks is a CAD software.
not SolidWorks.
No, you're not gonna get this. These guys are almost exclusively known for Autotune, and they have not had a huge number of follow-up hits that would be known in the popular zeitgeist. Autotune is like their thing.
Producers,
Do you want to know the name of the company?
of course.
It's Antares Audio Technologies.
Never heard of them.
And
Can you?
their product was, so Autotune is sort of like the trade name, but the device was, it was a hardware box, like a rack mounted deal, Antares vocal processor, and that was what had the Autotune algorithm running on it. And so the generic name of Autotune is a pitch shifter, basically, right?
Mm,
So the function of Autotune was a combination of, it did pitch shifting, but it was pitch shifting for the sake of pitch correction, which is different than pitch shifting. Like if you want to have, a guitar effect that's through a pedal where you're doing pitch shifting to make it sound, weird and
steel
wacky or
guitar.
something. Yeah. So it was conceptualized as a corrective tool, and then famously became, and then it was like secret, like nobody nobody knew that there was digital pitch correction being applied to tracks in the studio, although in retrospect it would have been obvious. And then it became popular as people chose the warbly sound and used it as an effect instead of as a cleanup tool. So yeah, pitch correction is the Autotune generic name.
So it's Coca-Cola for Autotune is what.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
if you like cola beverages, then you like pitch correction. If you like Coke, you're an auto tune guy. But my question, this is all of this background was to ask you to clarify for me. When you say hasn't been auto tuned, do you mean hasn't been pitch corrected using algorithmic automatic detection of intended pitch? Or do you mean had the pitch manipulated in post production in any way?
Yes, the latter. I'd say the past 10 years. Even people with great voices have they run them through pitch correction.
Do you think this is a secret at this point? Like people, fans are
No,
would be surprised by this?
I do. I
Yeah,
do.
me too. I think you're right.
I think probably could be wrong. Maybe Bard, maybe our genie would know.
Well, Bard's
I,
job is not to be right, so we're not going to ask Bard if we're looking for facts. If I'm looking for an articulately explained incorrect position, I'll go to Bard. If I'm looking for the facts, ma'am, I think I'll go to the bastion of truth, Wikipedia.
So both of those are also statements that the average person does not know are incorrect. like Chat GPT is, well, their performance metrics, we don't know what they are, but
I have
they're not good. I know that.
I have such a narrow position on, and this doesn't apply to Bard per se, but Chat GPT explicitly as a large language model, it was it was released, it was positioned, it was designed, it was explained by the company, it was explained by the CEO. It has had many words spilled. The point of it is to make realistic sounding speech or realistic sounding text. That is the intention of of the product. So if the goal is to sound realistic, fact worthiness, it was that was never part of the pitch. So like if the point of Coke was to be sweet and delicious, but we're all talking about how it gives us energy. Well, if the point wasn't to give us energy, it just so happened that it had cocaine in it. Like, and then caffeine, right? Because the cocaine was too far. But if it just so happened that it also gave us energy, well, we're measuring it against the thing that it was never set up to do in the first place. Similarly, if we think it's supposed to give us energy and we're all talking about how great it tastes, well, it's fantastic if it tastes good, but I mean, Monster Energy doesn't taste good. It's designed to give you a bunch of caffeine. So, I, anytime ChatGPT comes up, I'm like, I have the same one talking point, which is elegant sounding human like text. That's what it was built for. And then I have like total mental block to anything about the rest of the conversation as soon as anybody brings up accuracy. I'm like, I can't even participate in the conversation anymore after that because I'm just like, this isn't what it's for. Let's go talk about something else.
Yeah. Well, that is probably a pragmatic position. That is a realistic pragmatic position, but I think the vast majority of the population's position is not that. I
How do culture and technology interact with each other here? You know, the pitch correction thing. You know, nobody's hiding the fact that there's pitch corrected post processed music. There are lots of people who talk about how a particular sound sounds too produced or overproduced, or it sounds too good, or it doesn't sound very live, or it sounds too digital. Like people who are just non-professional, they're not producers, they don't know anything about engineering, but they're just music fans. They know what these things mean. And similarly, you know, like the average user, like they can understand the difference between I'm using this to search for actual facts I need versus I'm using this to find, you know, an answer that sounds like talking to somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once something becomes the way that everybody feels about it, and and the culture is, well, so and so writes their own songs and therefore that's superior. So and so sounds, you know, less processed, or it sounds more raw, or it sounds more realistic, or all this stuff. Like that aspect of culture, like if the expectation is, you know, we set up these yardsticks, is that purely a cultural phenomenon, or is that also related to the tech and the artistry and the creation of the thing?
How is it that, how, I'm curious to get your take on this. How is it that it's a sort of minority position? Legitimately don't understand this. It's a minority position that we like. Okay, so here are the parallels. We like, culturally, in mass, we like homemade biscuits because you can tell that they weren't mass produced. We like to see that they were handmade, and we like to see the jagged edges,
Right.
and that, you know, we want to put the illusion together that it was a 70-year-old grandma was in the kitchen, and, you know, we like to see that. But with music or with art, we don't want to see, we want to see the mass produce. We want to see we want the assembly line to crank out the same thing over and over and over again.
Would you consider yourself to be from biscuit country?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do
for
you
sure.
have a preferred biscuit?
I don't eat them anymore. I
When
mean,
you were a biscuit eater,
Yeah, buttermilk biscuits. So little bit of information for you in the Kentucky sort of hillbilly area that I've lived my whole life, and I say that with as a term of endearment, literally. Um, they call them cat heads.
Kentucky is a unique state. People don't know that. Kentucky is the state most likely to secretly have the land equivalent of Atlantis somewhere inside of it that no one else knows about.
But tell right now, just me, but other ears and eyeballs at some point, when you came in a couple years back for your first and only visit to Louisville, what were your thoughts of Louisville as a city?
How honest do you want me to be here?
Well, I know what you told me, so I want to.
I don't know what I told you, but I have a strong opinion about Louisville overall.
Well, I want to hear your strong opinion, and then we'll corroborate the facts.
Okay, so a couple things. First, flatter than I was expecting. I was picturing rolling hills. Uh, Two, more concrete than I was expecting. I was there on a particularly hot week, and I felt like I was being baked alive by reflecting sun off of mostly faded asphalt and cracked concrete. Um, I also felt like that was largely because I was in somewhat the wrong part of town.
For sure, you were.
And I also felt like in downtown or in Louisville proper, I became increasingly convinced that there might not be a right part of town.
So that's not the case. Um, it's very much an urban city. I mean, Louisville is it's a proper American city. I mean, there's a
I was surprised by how spread out and like quiet it was, while also being very much urban design. Like it's undoubtedly urban, while also being not particularly busy, crowded, or uh, like it built up, but in a sideways way, not in a skyscraper way. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. It's not Toronto in that respect. Toronto is the most geographically diffused city that I've ever been to. Did I say Toronto?
You said Toronto.
Okay. Yeah. Very diffused. It's very spread out. It's a massive city in that
Yeah.
respect. Louisville's not that, but it is spread out a little bit. Um, but you are correct. There are parts of Louisville, as in any major, and I think, it's not New York City or Chicago, but it's the 16th largest city in the country. It's a big place, big-ish. There are rough spots, and you were on the outside of those rough spots in the downtown area where you were staying.
What are the next two geographically closest cities to Louisville, small or large?
That's what's interesting about where we're at is we have Lexington in Kentucky. Lexington's not big, but it's a really unique place. Not necessarily my scene, very Civil War-y, very Thurston Howell the Third-ish, sort of old money kind of
Oh yeah,
horses and that kind of
a
thing.
lot of horses.
Not my scene at all. But we have
You heard it here first. Terry, not a horse guy.
uh, definitively not a horse guy. But we have Cincinnati, that's an hour away. We have Indianapolis, that's an hour and 45 minutes away. We have Nashville, which is 2.5 hours away. St. Louis, which is 4 hours away.
So the thing that's, if I'm going to do a comparison here, one thing that struck me about Louisville was it was way less similar to Cincinnati or Lexington than
Oh
I was
yeah,
expecting, and probably more similar to St. Louis than I was expecting by a lot.
that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, Cincinnati is uh, banking and finance. Louisville's a little more gritty. I mean, Cincinnati has its spots too, but Louisville's interesting. There's a Kentucky, both Lexington and Louisville are test markets for a lot of restaurant concepts because it's a very rich, like especially Louisville, but it's a very rich arts and cuisine and culture scene.
Yeah.
Um, it really is there are a ton of bands now. Again, full circle, a ton of bands in the indie scene, plus, some people that I don't really listen to, like Jack Harlow's from Louisville, who is apparently a big thing now. My Morning Jacket is from Louisville. They're a band that probably a lot of post college age kids now, but Slint was from Louisville. They're very influential indie band. A bunch of artists are from here. Um, yeah. So
I want to I want to address the homemade biscuit question
I want you to,
more directly.
now that you know that they're called cat heads.
Cat heads. Okay. Are they called buttermilk cat heads?
A buttermilk biscuit done properly, homemade, is one of the cat head. Just go with it.
I like I like I like the worse a biscuit is for you, generally, the better I like it. And when I think of corporate biscuits, the type of biscuits that jump out at me, Popeyes, where they've somehow got the perfect salt butter on the top of them.
But
So
that's like some chemical from. I promise you, that's probably not real salt or real butter. It's like it's an AI. It's an AI tool.
it's the
That's
AI
yeah,
designed to tickle my tongue. And
exactly.
I'm totally picking up what they're putting down.
It's the
Similar,
it's the synthesizer sound you were playing
yeah,
last week. They
right.
put that on the biscuit.
And I'm loving it. I also deeply enjoy uh I also deeply enjoy uh cheddar biscuits from Red Lobster, which similarly they have the same vibe, right? They're the Kool-Aid of biscuits, right? Like it's not juice. It's not really anything. Like it is a non-thing. It is a flavor delivery device intended to put chemicals into your body and trigger your pleasure receptors. Really, like unless you consider the science of how to manipulate people's feelings through their physiological response, there's no real like craft to the thing, right? The craft was in a laboratory. It was the scientist peering into their beaker, or seeing the pipette as they drop a single drop onto a synthetic tongue, and they see the colors change perfectly, and they're thinking, "My God, it's beautiful.
But see, no,
It's the perfect synthetic butter."
you're making the point that ties this whole thing together is that there are no it's not an exploration like the biscuits and the music. There's a formula to that all of the marketing people have said, this is the demographic we want to go for. This is how to make this thing that they want. And so then the builders just build it according to the formula.
I've put it off long enough that we can't avoid it any longer. We have to talk about Andy Warhol.
Let's do it.
I don't know. You start. My job was to bring up Andy Warhol. I feel like I've done it. Tell me everything you have to say about Andy Warhol.
Here, it's an interesting case study for me because I have my opinions, and my personal opinions are probably shared on Andy Warhol specifically with the broader culture. However, he did a collab with Basquiat, which I still thought his contribution was the weak link. Uh, but
You're probably not the only one who thought that either.
So I'm not going to be one of those people that says, okay, this painting of this woman doesn't look like just exactly like what this woman should look like. Here's my controversial hot take. I don't like impressionists and like historical paintings because I think they'd be photographers today. I don't want to see something recreated exactly as it is. To me, as a consumer of art,
Yeah.
I want to see something else. Like that bores me. The Mona Lisa, I'm sorry, it bores me. I can appreciate that that was painted a long time ago and that there's a lot of historical significance for the painting. Those people would be photographers today.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So what? You can paint something exactly as it looks in real life. Why would I not just buy a picture of it that is really exactly as it looks in real life? So my thing on that is I get the dichotomy of contemporary art being garbage. I get people who, instinctually go back to prior periods and say that's the golden age of art when people painted things that look exactly like they were in real life. I get that. I am not drawn to that, but I also get, okay, Andy Warhol is pushing the bounds of, you know, Campbell soup can. Uh, okay.
That's the example I had in mind. It was Marilyn Monroe and Campbell's Soup
I,
Can. Those are the two I have in my mind.
and I'm like, and my opinion is okay. Like, I'm probably with culture on that one. I'm probably with the majority of people. Is that a learned thing? Is it a learned thing that if something is like, oh, or is it a bought thing, or is it a you're aligned with the right people thing?
I
Like,
have a okay. So the way I interpret this across the board to answer your question of whether it's a learned thing is I tend to try and think about, would somebody have come along and done that, or the thing that filled the same space, or the thing that did the same thing. Like, was Campbell Soup Can inevitable in culture? And I think this started with the Beatles, right? And this is a long time ago, before I was ever thinking about art. I didn't care about art, but I was thinking about the Beatles, and somebody pointed out, it might have been a Beatle, that that the Beatles, or something that was essentially equivalent, was gonna happen, and like, it was just gonna happen. There was gonna be like, there was gonna be an artist that hit that level of fame. There was gonna be somebody that was that popular. There was somebody that was gonna be, you know, produce at a level that was accepted as, you know, the best ever, and it was guaranteed to happen. And even the sound was probably going to be somewhere in the same, in the same ballpark. And the argument is basically like, the Beatles were inevitable, and if not them, someone like them. And I think that this is the lens through which I view Campbell Soup Can, the painting. Is, I can't help but think that even more so than the Beatles, Campbell Soup Can was inevitable. Like, somebody was going to do something like that. You know what I mean? Like, somebody was eventually going to take an everyday marketing object and smash that together with a giant canvas, and they painted it, and it was like the general vibe was gonna happen by somebody at some point. I also feel this way about Banksy. Like, Banksy was inevitable, or the multiple people that are Banksy, or the Adidas company brought to you by Banksy, or whatever. Like, whatever is Banksy, all of it feels totally inevitable to me.
I don't know on the Campbell soup can.
Has it been done since? Not the exact painting, but has the same thing
So it's this.
effectively been done since?
It's the same for me. It's the same as I don't like necessarily care for Led Zeppelin or the Rolling Stones because of all the bands that they produced,
Yeah.
all the people that wanted to be them. I respect them tremendously. Like, I respect the talent that are those bands and the staying power and that sort of thing. The music doesn't do anything for me inspirationally. It's not my thing. It's okay. I view Campbell's soup can the same way. Yeah, people, it spawned a bunch of even worse renditions of, people putting a toilet in literally a porcelain toilet in a white backdrop and wheeling that in as a piece of art. I say that also being the chief proponent for the notion that art is very subjective. and things that we're drawn to or satisfied by. That's the beauty of it, is it's subjective and it's for the individual's interpretation. But I think at a certain point, the uh it's not about the piece, it's about the anti-conformity, and you're just looking for folks to validate a piece of art as art because it's anti-art.
So this is where I come back to giving a crap about something like Campbell's Soup Can. So I land on, despite having asked you these questions and despite having brought up Andy Warhol, I find myself, if you were to ask me, how do you feel about Campbell's Soup Can? I would simply say, I don't care. Like I don't care about Campbell's Soup Can. But then if you ask me, I made a mistake. I had to ask Bard, so I'm not 100% sure that Bard is correct. But Campbell's Soup Can wasn't painted; it was screen
No,
printed.
it's a print.
So I'm much more interested, and you're talking about you were talking about as impressionists, but the same thing applies today as hyper realists. But I'm thinking about Vermeer, who was famous for like capturing the way light falls on a subject. And I'm thinking about there was a Van Gogh exhibit I saw where I think it was called Iterations or something like that. But it was basically there were uh, some sort of non-destructive scans of the layers of a canvas, and it turns out that he had painted the same thing like 6 times in 6 different layers of the painting, and then he had also gone back over different periods of time and like adjusted this or changed that on the same canvas in the same work. And now all of a sudden it's not about what I'm looking at all. Now I'm thinking about how did that get made? And it's a completely different way to think about what's in front of me. And I'm much more interested in another example is, and I don't like the guy, like the dude gives a bad vibe, but, and please don't name the artist for this one. The guy that's working on the Blackest Black, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
Great. Perfect. So his like life's work over the last 15 years has been to invent the darkest black paint, meaning it absorbs the most light. And he, like, from the get go, he's like, I want to sell this as the blackest black, and I'm not going to license it to anybody. And then there was a competing blackest black from another company, and there's like this war around how do we get the blackest paint. And then I think backwards about, well, that by itself a little odd, but not by itself super interesting to me. A little bit interesting, but not super interesting. But then I think about the difficulty of particular colors of paint across history. So there were colors that don't show up in particular geographically, in particular geographic regions at certain times. X, Y, or Z color was hard to come by and therefore didn't show up a lot. And that starts to get like, now my mind is like racing and I totally care. And I still don't give a flying F what I'm looking at in the painting, except for now I'm looking for like, oh, the yellow from Spain in 1772 is completely different than the yellow in America in 1950. How was that even possible? And then do the same thing for, color, consistency, brush strokes, paint application methods. And we're only talking about paint. We haven't even gone to any other medium besides, paint on canvas or paint on, what pick your thing. And it gets into this totally different way to approach the work that makes me feel even more cynical than I already did about the work itself or about the image itself. And now I'm very interested in it because I'm thinking about how did we get here?
That is the exact conversation we were having yesterday about beauty.
Oh yeah, totally.
What's the science behind what each of us finds is, as a hypothesis, can we posit that the folks who like impressionist paintings don't care about the methodology? They just,
Yeah.
the end aesthetic is what they're interested in, whereas there are others, and it's not a judgment, a value judgment on who's superior in their ability to consume art. There's something else in that. There are others, you and me, I'm assuming a lot of other people as well, that the process and the intent, which is what I was trying to raise with beauty yesterday, but the intent of what we like to consume in art, the intent behind that, the methodology, how hard was what
Yeah,
the
exactly.
creation, or how unique was that technique or that concept for his time.
Right.
um and that's a nonlinear system, because then we are still making value judgments about how we perceive the aesthetic output,
Yeah.
but it's more to it than just the aesthetic output. And that's what I'm fascinated by with culture, is how much of this is how much of culture, and this is, I come back to the buttermilk biscuit, how much how much of this is science, how much of this is brain, how much of this is evolutionary, and how much of this is, I don't I let me say this, I'll set the floor for this discussion. It's not zero. It's not there is no, this is just all like, we make a choice we like, and it's just like is its own arbitrary thing.
This, I mean,
It's
this is how I end up as a collectivist more than an individualist. Is, yeah, individual contributions matter, but the for example, humanity's collective inability to realistically represent a hand for most of human history is hilarious to me. Like, nobody knew how to draw a hand, and the Da Vinci man sketches where it's anatomically accurate or pretty anatomically accurate are, I did not understand any of the meaning of why that mattered at all until I realized that he was the only one that could do that. And then it took me until I was quite old before I realized that just as a species, we did not know how to draw a hand.
but we could sculpt hands.
Sure, yeah, we just couldn't draw them.
We just couldn't draw them or paint them.
Which make
uh,
which if you work backwards from this, of course we couldn't. Like, you have to learn how to represent the three-dimensional in two dimensions. Like, someone has to invent things like perspective. Somebody has to invent, a Cartesian coordinate system that's represented on a flat space. Like, this stuff didn't come from nowhere. Like, it had to be worked on, and the versions of it that didn't work had to all be tried. So yeah, of course it makes perfect sense that we wouldn't know how to do that. But you think nothing about it now, because even though you can't draw a human hand true to life, I assume, no offense, can you draw a human hand perfectly?
no.
Yeah, I can't draw a human hand. I can draw a crummy facsimile of a human hand. But if either of us needed a human hand to be drawn, like maybe $20 we could go get a commission a human hand drawing, and for 5 cents you can buy one from wherever you need one.
Yeah. Or you can rattle the old interwebs and shake loose a
Steal one.
steel one.
Steal one. Yeah, so I think that the the collective nature of this is, there are problems that humanity solved that we take for granted now, and there are not even problems, but sort of like challenges that have been met. Yeah,
Awarenesses.
yeah, things we know across all of us that you can't really unknow. At least I hypothesize that you can't really unknow them. And then when we look forward, it's going to be, looking forward, the progression or the continuance of humanity is going to be synonymous with the progression of humanity to some degree, right? There may be things that are lost forever, but as there are, continue to be people, there will everybody will be building on the stuff that all the people that came before them have figured out. And even if you give a lot of credit to anybody's contributions at a given time that they lived, taken in the context of all of humanity, those contributions will inevitably look smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller compared to the collective contributions. So, I think that the thing, I'm sort of struggling to tie this back to your points about where, how do you promote positive culture going forward in arts and science, or arts and music, versus uh objectively less positive culture going forward. But I don't it's hard to tell, when does the craft of making an AI generated piano tune for Peaceful Forest Walk, when does that pivot back around and suddenly like somebody has an aha moment, and then that turns into a huge win and becomes, objectively good culture, as opposed to at minimum tedious commercial nothingness, and at worst actually detrimental because it's like anti
Yeah.
anti beauty, you know what I mean?
Yeah. What is the musical equivalent of Campbell's soup can? Um, I don't know. I think what we're dancing around, or at least there are a lot of sort of um, I think competing or supporting. Like there are a lot of synergies in thought here. But one of the things that I think to separate out is the subjectivity of the aesthetic versus the intent of the creator. And I think that for me is the buttermilk biscuit. And how is it that we evolve, or we as a popular culture, we appreciate the flawed nature of the buttermilk biscuit, but we want the aesthetically perfectly manicured aesthetic of art and music. There's no room, like, and the reason why I even brought up the biscuit analogy in the first place is it's one of my favorite things. I'm a make no bones about it. I love old punk rock aesthetic. I love it. Like that,
Name
this
some names.
Fugazi, Husker Du,
Yeah,
Sloppy as Hell. The
yeah.
Replacements, I put them in there. I think the Replacements are more a pop band than a punk band, but they had the slot. Like there was a lot of stuff captured in those records that was imperfect, but it was beautiful.
Clash.
I mean, yeah, it almost feels cliche to say Clash, but yes, I grew up liking Clash. I liked Guided by Voices. I think they're a punk band.
Yeah.
I like them a lot, actually. They're a bunch of those kinds of bands that it's accessible, um, but it's raw, and they're creating their version of art. Point is I like those records that have the occasional flaw, and we've been, all the records that I've done, we've paid attention to leaving those things in and not doing the extra take to eliminate that the character that is the occasion. Now if it sounds like trash or something's way out of time, you want to redo it. But
Do you ever go back and listen to pop music from the 90s, or pop rock or alternative from the 90s and early 2000s?
give me some band names.
Like, I don't know, man.
The
Like
Lemonheads. I like the Lemonheads.
more popular than the Lemonheads.
Oh,
I mean, like,
they were popular, weren't they? Gin
hold on.
Blossoms.
Gin Blossoms. Yeah. Like, if you listen to a Gin Blossoms track.
Hey, jealousy.
Yeah. Have you listened to any Gin Blossoms track, or like Toad the Wet Sprocket, or a Train? Have you listened to any of these bands in the last 5 years,
No,
on purpose or by accident?
no.
Smashing Pumpkins.
Um, yeah, I had a song turn up on a playlist on Spotify.
Nine Inch Nails, but only from the 90s.
No, I would no.
Okay. The point I'm making here is what I thought sounded pretty highly produced at the time. With the benefit of hindsight and, I guess, forced ear training over an additional couple of decades, it just sounds mostly bad.
Yeah,
Like, not, and it doesn't sound more live, and nor does it sound flawlessly produced. It
yeah.
sounds like the worst of both worlds.
So is that a tech thing?
Well, I mean, there are always awkward inflection points, and I think that the point I was going to make at the when you brought up the pursuit of the pursuit of handmade artistry and contrasted that with a Red Lobster cheddar biscuit. The I'm fine with overproduced sound or with sorry, let me back up. If I want to listen to immaculately produced music, I'm probably going to go listen to a producer's music. You know what I'm saying?
That is the point I'm making. You you
Yeah.
you 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 brilliantly summed it up for me. I would rather listen to Jay Dilla or to, any of the producers, and there are a bunch of them going back that have put out a lot of the big records. I would rather listen to their solo stuff, which is typically just instrumental,
Yeah.
their beats, than the artists who use their creation. And the artist is very popular. It doesn't mean that's not a value judgment on which one is more superior. We're better because we like the producer. That's what I'm drawn to. That's what I like.
And so, and Dilla's heavily depending on samples as well.
For sure.
So if you want to get into, like, the irony is the samples that somebody like Jay Dilla wants to use tend to, in the context of that sample or that hook or like whatever that one snippet that they're using, their aesthetic lean, and I'm using him as an example, but there are dozens of others cut in the same mold. Their aesthetic trends very heavily towards, let me get music that sounds like it was made by people playing instruments, right?
Yeah.
Not once you string it together into a song, it may not sound like that, but the more a drum break sounds like somebody was playing it on a drum kit, the better it's suited to a contemporary electronic production where you're only going to get a snippet of that sample anyway, right? So that drum break is going to be one little piece that makes it sound raw and authentic and real, which is hilarious because it is a recording that was made a long time ago on inferior equipment, and like then it gets rediscovered and it's been digitized and redigitized, and it is like it's none of the things that it purports to be, and then it's thrown into a blender with all this other stuff.
But see, what I love about that juxtaposition
Yeah.
is these producers, and this is what I like about contemporary musical art from people like that, is they turn it into this um rhythmically monotone.
Yeah.
Just it's a frequency it's a repetitive frequency.
Right.
It's drony, and that's the contemporary twist, is that it's not the looseness of jazz. It's very tight from a signature standpoint, and it's monotonous almost.
Do you like it?
I love monotony in music from the back, from the underneath. And then these producers throwing samples and little keyboard parts and lots of ear candy, a lot of ear candy on top of the monotony. Love that. I love it. Like, I
Do you like FX Twin? Speaking of producers, but not Jay
love
Dilla.
Aphex Twin.
So I
Love Aphex
find a lot of the stuff from early on, I have a kind of a hard time listening to. And then I listen to some of his more recent albums, and I'm like, this is what I've been needing all along out of this guy. It's like you just took an entire career of working on it and like getting it closer, and all you've done is taken the same music that you've already made and you made it better, right? And it's not the same tracks, like he's not re-releasing the album, but effectively it was like an Aphex song is always going to be an Aphex song, and it's going to be very quickly recognizable. And all he's done is refine it and 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 become an absolute expert at making that thing. And I find that with the benefit of additional refinement, I came to his music pretty late too. So I would hear a track here and there when it was new, and some of it really resonated, but some of it was, too esoteric for me, and it didn't strike the right balance of, listenable versus creative and novel. But then, everybody else that's been influenced this guy has also been influenced by this guy is also, they're putting out music that I'm hearing, and that's getting me more acclimated to,
Yeah.
what's noise versus what's music. Then with that lens, plus the fact that, Aphex Twin himself has refined it, now I get to like the new stuff, and I'm like, this is so much better than the old stuff, even though that's kind of disrespectful to the old stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, it doesn't have the same heart. Of course it doesn't have the same heart. It's like a fresh, newer, overproduced sounding heart. But for me, like, I found the biggest critique I had was inconsistency and like inaccessibility. I needed it to be more accessible than it was to, and once it became more accessible, then I was like, I'm here for it all the way.
For me, I'm constantly trying to figure out I agree with that. Although I like some of his older,
Of course.
I like his whole catalog, but I think it's different for rock bands or indie bands, or where the lyric and the song, there's nothing novel necessarily about the production or the music.
Right.
It's the message, the lyric, the vibe, the aesthetic of the band, the way, the emotion that the song elicits in the user. There's a small window for those artists. You don't
Exactly.
get better with time.
Yeah. Rock isn't dead because rock died. Rock is dead because the message that connected when it was fresh doesn't connect when it's an aging rocker anymore.
So exactly. And is it gone forever? I mean, I don't understand why, from a messaging standpoint, there's plenty to be pissed off about today. There's plenty. Who are the antagonists? Who are the agitators? Who's the John Lydon today?
Artists that you and I aren't listening to.
No, they don't exist.
They totally exist, and we're not listening to them because we're the aging rockers, not the target audience, up and coming, rabble rousers.
I don't think there's guitar. I don't think there are guitar, bass drum. They can have keyboard too, but I don't think there are, or even I don't think there are agitators. I'll leave it at that term, anti-establishment, and I don't mean like, the NPR wing of anti-establishment. I mean,
I challenge you to dig harder before you make that assertion. I believe in
send
the
some my
kids.
way. Send some my way.
I don't listen to agitator music. I listen to Aphex Twin through 2 decades of filtering down into its most accessible music. I'm the anti-agitation. I am de-agitating. I want smoothness. I'm one step away from Kenny G here.
I want like, it's why I like Hella and whatever. I think
we got to stop.
I
Wrap
know
this up.
this we could just do this conversation could go all week.
It's gonna.
Well,
pick it up tomorrow.
I mean, specifically, I think we should just do an art and music podcast, but I'd get bored just talking about that every day.
Well, we're in charge.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it. Yeah. We'll weave it into everything.
Do you want to see what random, possibly AI generated music we got for intro, outro, brought to you by the Cut Rate podcasting software we're using? Here it goes. This is the outro. Are you ready?
Yeah, we'll talk over the outro.
Yeah. What do you have to say about this? Oh God, I want to die. This is so not what I want to hear ever.
It's a bad video game.
That's hard to listen to. Oh my God. Make it stop. See you tomorrow, Terry.
All right, man.
That part's not as bad.